The topic? Climate change. Socialist Armageddon or Evangelical ghost story? The answer, tonight on Now See This Here Now Then. Hello, I'm Richard Cranium. Tonight, we look at global reduced climate reuse warming recycle change, better known as the slow warming of our climate, thus changing weather patterns, migration patterns, and dating patterns on Tinder. But first, a word from our sponsor. Oxygen. It makes up a third of the water on our planet, so drink it up. Oxygen. Climate change. Something 97% of scientists and 67% of Texans believe is real. The basic idea behind climate change is that the climate is changing. Thus, you can see why a third of the people in Texas don't think it is happening. Beyond that, the implications debated over climate change range from melting of ice caps to loss of birds to a shift from cable to streaming. The question that scientists are often forced to grapple with is what is causing the supposed conspiratorial change in weather, which leads down a rabbit hole of questionable suspects and a la carte Roku channels. Observe Exhibit A.
Yet pulling out of this is a huge deal, and to understand why, it helps to keep in mind one key number, and it's 2 degrees Celsius. Now, it's a bit of a shorthand, but the concern is that if we fail to limit temperature rise to that number, things get very bad and potentially irreversible.
Scientists say we'll likely see longer droughts and more intense heat waves, which could cause big disruptions to the world's food supply.
If we don't start with rapid emissions reductions and substantial emissions reductions, that will pass a danger point beyond which the consequences for many people and countries on Earth will simply become unacceptable and eventually disastrous.
It's true, and we are not talking about a fictional apocalypse like the one in the movie 2012. We're talking about an actual global disaster like the movie 2012. And the serious danger may actually be more imminent than you think. One estimate says that to have a good chance of avoiding the 2-degree threshold, human emissions of CO2 should stay below this level in total. This is our so-called carbon budget, and by the end of last year, we were estimated to already be up to here. And if current emission trends continue, we would go above that critical line in about 20 years. And that is not a long time. 20 years ago, South Park was on TV, Foo Fighters were touring, and Paul Rudd looked like this. What I'm saying is, 20 years ago was basically now.
That man's accent is fake. The fact that a global initiative has been started doesn't actually mean there's a climate crisis. If you really look at the Paris Agreement and the Green New Deal, they threaten to take away trillions of dollars away from every local oil magnate that is already barely operating on slender margins of billions of dollars. I do believe there's a conspiracy theory there. The Green New Deal itself was as good as the non-recycled paper it was printed on, not because it was wrong, but because opponents to the deal quickly attacked it, even if the proponents repeatedly noted that the deal was presented to start a conversation. But like so many naive 15-year-olds on Facebook, climate change supporters and activists were exposed by extreme examples on the right that 33% of Texans can truly understand. And then there's the problem of recycling. Although local and state governments have put moderately successful programs in place, the problem with recycling is that we have gotten so far behind on recycling we are shipping the waste to be recycled overseas, where it is simply piling up. So when you reduce and reuse, you're also shipping and repiling. With clear facts pointing to obvious conclusions, it is very apparent that the scientific community is wrong. All 97% of those scientists who believe in this obvious hoax. Everyone knows that 150 plus years of man-made pollution does not cause climate change and lead to a runaway greenhouse effect. Just look at Venus. I'm sure our multiple degree toting scientist posers would have you believe that Venus was caused by 1957 Chevys and Aquanet hairspray, which is quite feasible due to the winds on Venus. The evidence of man critically speeding up an already natural occurrence is sorely not lacking. So why do scientists believe that it is the case? The counter-arguments to this avalanche of common sense based on years of compiled evidence prove the real idiocy of 97% of the world's scientists. Observe Exhibit B.
Well, you even see them with some of the Democratic candidates. They get asked questions that are supposed to seem crazy. Like, the straw thing, that's silly, right? And they go, well, climate change is an existential threat, and maybe we can't have straws. And everyone starts looking at them like, really, guys? This is where we're going? Stop eating red meat. These are things that are never going to catch on with the electorate. And it just goes to, climate change is a religious belief for people who think they're too smart for religion. That's really what it's turned into now. And you see all the different aspects. It lines up. They're asking for forgiveness? Do they really think that there's any world in which any of this makes any difference?
Yeah, no, they've got Catholic guilt and they're going to confession, but they just have forgotten about God, so they're worshiping the environment instead. I thought that for a long time, that actually environmentalism in so many places have replaced religion, and you see it with kids in school. One of my kids, their class said that their motto was treat myself well, treat my friends well, respect the environment. And I was like, that's love your neighbor as yourself and God above all things. It's the same thing. You just replace who's in there.
Was that real? You're sure? Right. The issue with arguing against climate change is lack of ability to find any evidence that refutes the argument. You're seriously telling me they put that on the air? That wasn't like a sketch from SNL? All right. The core claim from climate deniers is that climate change is a natural ecological occurrence as seen through hundreds of thousands of years of geological evidence. Evidence that they refuse to acknowledge when discussing evolution, ironically. And even though they are correct, at the same time in nature it happens over hundreds of thousands of years. They actually put that on the air. The standards at that network are so confusing. All right. What scientists have found in environmental studies that cover the last 200 years is that we, the human race, have accelerated the process of climate change. And yes, when we look at climate activists, they can come up with some extremely bad gaffes when trying to explain what we need to do. Reduce, reuse, and recycle is a wonderful mantra, but so is the bigger the better in Texas. The fact that climate change is happening and not stopping means that we need to, at some point, really find ways to actually slow it down to a natural pace, as it should be. The most confusing part of this is that it has become a black and white issue over whether it is or is not happening, or if we are or are not the cause. In reality, it is a black and white issue. But the issue at stake is, are we going to do anything about it, or are we going to continue to bicker over it? In the 1970s and 1980s, the climate crisis was referred to as global warming. The past decade, the term has been replaced quite intelligently with the term climate change. Why? Because during the early years of climate awareness, opponents to climate awareness were able to transform a term that spoke for itself into a boogeyman of UFO-sized proportions. Now that the term has been replaced, the attack is on the people who are desperately trying to create awareness about the crisis that still exists. But Richard, it was a crisis in the 1980s. Nothing has happened like they said it would. Well, the only people who would argue that were either not born by the 1980s or did so much cocaine during the 1980s that they still think Cosby sweaters are cool. Or they're from Texas. It reminds me of something my wife Vacant told me the other day when she said, "Richard, sometimes you make me want to snort cyanide. I live for every breath that comes from that woman's juicy mouth." The reality is that it is happening. Whether you're on the left or right, the climate is turning against us. All of us. We can actually change it. But making a basket out of a water hose isn't going to be enough. It's going to take large sweeping change that we are very capable of accomplishing if we want to. And that is the real question in all of this. How much do we really want to do? That is all for tonight. Next time, sitcoms, socialist laugh track, or evangelical pregnancy scare. Until then, I am Richard Cranium. Ta-ta.